Good evening. I'm Barkha Dutt. You are with the Mojo Story. Our focus continues to be on the crisis in Afghanistan, where the Americans have left, and intriguingly and perhaps inevitably, India has opened contact with the Taliban. Let's bring up our big story on the broadcast this evening. India's envoy to Qatar has met with a key Taliban negotiator in Doha. It is a meeting that India says took place at the request of the Taliban. Now, what is also interesting is that the meeting has taken place with Sher Mohd Stanikzai. He has, of course, been the head of the Taliban's political office in Qatar, Doha. But many in India know him. And they know him because this negotiator actually trained at the IMA, that's the Indian Military Academy, has friends in the Indian military, but actually developed a set of entrenched contacts with Pakistan's military intelligence, underlining his importance in the Taliban superstructure. Now, all of this has happened as the United Nations Security Council, with India in the chair, is passing a resolution that says Afghanistan must not be used for terror activities or for sheltering terrorists. But alongside, is the world already de facto recognizing the Taliban as a state actor? Isn't that what's already happened? And won't that make the world lose the last leverage we have to actually mitigate the extremism of a group that triggered America's failed war in Afghanistan 2 decades ago? Looking at both the American withdrawal, the aftermath, the consequences for the world, and also India's decision to have this dialogue with the Taliban negotiator, let's bring up a panel of experts on the program today. We're joined first by Lisa Curtis. Lisa has been an official in the Trump administration and a key advisor on the region, in particular Afghanistan. It's great to have you back, Lisa. We're also joined by Brigadier Sandeep Thapar, who very kindly shared photographs of Stanikzai with his corpsmith at the IMA. Talk about living in a dystopian normal. An IMA graduate goes on to become a Taliban negotiator. Who would have thought? Padma Rao, a veteran journalist who's covered the foreign beat for many decades, is with us. Happymon Jacob, Happy and I have been arguing forever. He has advocated that India talk to the Taliban, and when he first started saying that, I was among many who criticized him. And we're also joined by Ambassador Amar Sinha, who's a veteran diplomat and has, in fact, been a foremost expert on the Taliban. It's great to have you with us, Ambassador. And in fact, I want to start straight away by asking you what you make of that dialogue between India and Stanikzai in Doha. Till now, we were calling our engagement tactical. It now seems to be moving into the strategic realm, juxtaposed with the resolution passed by the UNSC, the Security Council. It seems like we, along with the world, are already close to recognizing the Taliban as a state actor. Ambassador Sinha.
Good evening. Good evening to all your viewers. I'm actually happy that this contact has come out of the hijab, so to say. Obviously, and this was done at the request of Taliban, and perhaps it was good time that it became public that we were actually in touch with the Taliban at different levels. And it's not the first time that Mr. Stanikzai has reached out. In fact, when we had gone to Moscow in 2018, it was at his request that we had met him and we'd listened to him. And obviously, more than listening, I'm sure India has many things to convey to him in terms of what we expect Taliban government to be, how we want it to evolve. And I think our strategic objective today, besides the protection of our individuals and citizens and bringing them back, is that they remain true to what Mullah Baradar said when the intra-Afghan talks began, that he wants Afghanistan to be a free, independent, and a nation which is focused on development. And if that happens, and if Taliban does become a nationalist political force, I think most of the concerns that we see of it being a proxy and it doing somebody else's bidding would be a matter of the past. We have seen this with the Mujahideen, and I have absolutely no doubt that a very large percentage of these leaders would move in that direction.
Okay, I don't know that I share your optimism, and I'll have questions later in the program, but I'm glad you mentioned the Moscow talks. So for perspective to our audience and to our fellow panelists, Ambassador Sinha was one of two former envoys and veteran diplomats who was at the same table as the Taliban in 2018, if my memory serves me right. Ambassador Sinha, would you agree that this is a de facto beginning of the recognition of the Taliban government in Afghanistan? And the danger with that is that all we had in the global community was to not recognize this government, to take our time doing it. Haven't we done this too fast, too soon?
Barkha, there is a saying in Farsi, Dilli Durast. So I would still say that it's still far away. It is the first step, but recognition depends on a number of factors, and I wouldn't call them conditionalities. But yes, this is engagement. And it is also a recognition of the fact that the political landscape in Kabul has changed. And it changes every day. And you will see it will change even today when Taliban tries to form a government. It's not that we are seeing end of a story. It's just beginning of a new chapter, a new story.
Okay. Lisa Curtis, I'd like to bring you in. Obviously, India will be guided by our own self-interest in the set of choices we make, as any country would. But my question to you is, when you were last on this program, you said, let the world not be in a hurry to recognize the Taliban regime. When you look at the fact that the first United Nations Security Council resolution did not mention the Taliban, the most recent one mentions the Taliban 5 times, but does not actually condemn it. Of course, India is in the chair. We pass a resolution calling for Afghanistan to not shelter terror groups, but we do not call the Taliban terrorists. Hasn't there already been a shift, Lisa?
Well, I don't think so. Look, first, I think it was inevitable that India must have diplomatic contacts with the Taliban. They're in control of the country now. India has interests. It must protect its citizens that still reside in Afghanistan. It must protect its counterterrorism interest and seek to ensure that terrorist groups that target India don't have a sanctuary there, just like the United States. But this doesn't mean that India or the United States or anyone else has granted diplomatic status or recognize the Taliban. It just means there is communication and a recognition that that communication needs to happen. And with regard to the UN Security Council resolution, I think it rightly, calls on the Taliban to ensure that Afghanistan won't be a terrorist safe haven. That is first and foremost on everyone's minds. So I think we need to wait and see, monitor the situation. I think the US and India should work together on that. They have the same interests in terms of Afghanistan not being a terrorist hotbed. So they should be exchanging notes, information, and sort of moving in tandem together in how we deal with Afghanistan moving forward. I think one of the mistakes the U.S. has been making is focusing a lot of its diplomatic attention on Pakistan, China, Russia, who clearly don't share our interests in Afghanistan. But a country like India, like the European Union, like the UK, we want to see human rights preserved. We want to see women's rights protected, and we want to see the terrorists dealt with in Afghanistan. So I think it's important for our countries to work together, share information, and approach the Taliban in the same way.
But can I push you on that, though? If we do look at the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan as effectively a Pakistan invasion, which I know so many of you do, then by engaging with the Taliban, aren't we giving a free pass to Pakistan? That's for you, Lisa, and I have the same question for Ambassador Sinha, and then I'll open it up. Lisa.
Well, again, unfortunately, we don't have much of a choice. We have our citizens who are still there. We have our interests. So I think actually, if we don't communicate directly to the Taliban, we actually give the Pakistanis more influence, because not all Taliban want to be under the thumb of Pakistan. You're absolutely right. The fact that the Haqqani network and people like Khalil Haqqani have had such a prominent role, Anas Haqqani, does show that Pakistan has a great deal of influence within this current setup. However, people like Mullah Burader, who may become the president, He spent 10 years in a Pakistani jail. He has no love lost for the Pakistanis. So I think by directly engaging with the Taliban, you actually have a better chance of, separating them from their Pakistani benefactors.
Ambassador Sinha, do you want to respond to that? There are some of us, I had Christine Fair on the program just a day ago, and I agreed with her that the Kabul attacks themselves are designed to actually benefit a kind of legitimacy to the Taliban. You suddenly have all these American commanders talking about cooperating with the Taliban on the ground. Not everybody is convinced that the Islamic State K faction, the Khorasan faction, is in fact a real adversary of the Taliban. Many of us believe that there is a Pakistan puppeteer at the top. So I explain to our audience, are we not upending decades of there's no good Taliban, bad Taliban by now sitting at a table with the Taliban?
Yes, Barkha. In fact, I also actually subscribe to that view. That attack, and I think I tweeted about this or I spoke to people, that this attack was, in a way, it did two things. It first put the Taliban government on notice. Second, it suddenly made Taliban government look like the victim. So it was a change of role from aggressor to a victim after they successfully staged a coup against a democratically elected government. So it was part of the whitewash program. That's absolutely, I have no doubt about it. And everybody is now sympathizing with the Taliban. And the third thing, which is more long term, is, as I said, this is a new chapter where a stable Kabul government will not be allowed to function. And that is what we have seen it with Hekmatyar, how he was used against the Rabbani government and others. And we have seen that there's always reserve force kept to keep Kabul unsettled and ineffective, weak, and dependent.
Yeah. So that, again, in my mind, raises all sorts of questions about, the effectiveness of engagement. But I take the point that both of you have made, that there are only so many choices from a menu of bad options. Brigadier Thapar, before we look at the principle of whether we should, we shouldn't, do we even have a choice, tell us about this guy. I mean, I know that you know friends who studied with him. We've read the articles. He's a personal conservative. He studies at the IMA. He goes on to get his influence in the Taliban because of his deep contacts with Pakistan MI military intelligence. Tell us a little bit about what we know about this character called Sher Mohd Stanikzai, who has met with the Indian ambassador in Doha.
See, Barkha, Sher Abbas is a cosmate. He had come from the ACC into the IMA, and we guys had come from NDA. We do 1 year together.
I lost you, sir. Yeah, you're back. Yeah, go ahead.
But we knew each other, having seen him, observed him. Much of his qualities, once this whole incident came into public light, we all cosmates sat down and we discussed, we remembered. It's been 40 years, remember. So we tried to remember what he was like. And all we could remember was that he was a very, very ordinary gentleman cadet. There's nothing outstanding or about him. He was like part of the crowd. In any case, most foreign cadets they have a language issue, and Afghanis, both Hindi and English, they have a problem. So they would stay within their own crowd. There were 4 other Afghani cadets there. So they would stay in their own crowd. He was not outstanding, either a very good sportsman or a cross country or anything. He was just part of the crowd, melted. And I do not recollect, or none of us recollect, anything very out of the any strange about him or any ordinary. Yeah. He was just like the rest of us.
So, as a soldier, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Now, after commission, I am given to understand he did not maintain any contact with either of us, any of us. He went and served 16 years in the Afghan army. Now, only after that he joined the Taliban. I believe 96 or thereafter. Now, that says a lot. He went and served, and then something happened somewhere. The circumstances, one cannot say why he had to switch over to Taliban. So that was one. Now,
Yeah. Let me just sorry, hold
other
on,
thing
hold on.
is that people are talking, seeing too much into his India connection. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an important point. That, are we latching onto this India connection, like that explains why we spoke to him, or that explains how he might behave, or that explains why he reached out. Hearing you say Brigadier Thapar is that's a load of nonsense. I mean, he's a Taliban negotiator, right? It's just pure
Absolutely.
coincidence that he happened to be at the IMA, right? Yeah, I want to bring in Happymon at this point. I think that was a really important point, that we don't make much of the fact that the Taliban negotiator we've opened contacts with is someone who studied at the IMA. Happymon, you get a chance to say "I told you so," and I'm still going to tell you I don't see the benefit. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I myself am quite surprised by the fact that India reached out to the Taliban leadership in
Well, hang
Afghanistan.
on. They say it was at the Taliban's request. The statement says it was at the Taliban's
That's right.
request.
That's right. Yeah. At the Taliban's request, India and Taliban negotiators met at Doha yesterday, and even before the international community has recognized the Taliban as the legitimate stakeholder, legitimate government in Afghanistan. This has happened. That's quite surprising, if you ask me. I didn't see this coming, but I think this only tells me that New Delhi has woken up to the reality and he has decided to make peace with the reality. If you actually look at the UNSC statement, and India's understanding with the Taliban, I must say there are quite a few commonalities between these two statements. Essentially, I think what we are looking at is the Indian demand that Afghan territory should not be used by terror groups, and Taliban should take responsibility of that. I think it essentially boils down to that. The reality, Barkha, is that, and this is something that I've been arguing for a very long time, whether we like it or not, whether New Delhi likes the Taliban or not, New Delhi has the obligation to secure India's national interest in Afghanistan. And that basically boils down to ensuring that the territory under Taliban's control in Afghanistan is not used for terrorism purposes against India. It is as simple as that. So I think we have to come to terms with that reality. I think the entire international community is coming to terms with the reality. The Americans are talking to the Taliban. People say that there are intelligence inputs that the Americans are perhaps giving to the Taliban at this point of time about terror threats, etc. And this is despite the fact that thousands of American soldiers have been killed by the Taliban, and vice versa. If these two,
but why would we quote the Americans in Afghanistan? The Americans, with respect to our friend Lisa here, have completely bungled. It's been a disaster, the way the withdrawal has been handled. I mean, I don't know that we should be benchmarking our policy. That's the sort of iconic picture of the last soldier leaving. I get what you're saying, Happymon, that the world is doing it. So what choice do we have? And I'll take that around the panel. Padma Rao, let me just get your thoughts in at this point as we look at that last American soldier leaving. I can't help thinking it isn't over yet. I can't help forecasting that they may be back before they've actually made peace with. Padma Rao, go ahead.
As well, Barkha, because I see this pretty much as one door having been deliberately shut to deliberately open another door, and this time you're in cohorts with an old enemy and an enemy's enemy is your friend sort of scenario developing, with the ISIS Khorasan now becoming the new target. So I don't think the Americans are, we're going to see the last of the United States in Afghanistan. There are just a few quick points I'd like to make about why India, why the two sides are talking. I feel that, if you look at our relationships with Pakistan and China, with whom we share thousands of kilometers of border, even in the worst case scenarios and in the worst of times, there have always been channels of communication open. So, and also if you look at Myanmar and what has happened in Myanmar since the junta took over, hundreds of innocent people have been killed, and yet we have kept channels of communication open, and indeed being criticized to an extent by many of our Western allies for doing that. So I'm of the opinion that talking or engaging with the Taliban, as long as Pakistan has stakes, as long as China has stakes, involvement, interference of any kind in Afghanistan can actually be the beginning of a great game of diplomacy. And, and I have no doubt that India's Foreign Office will come up trumps if it receives cross-party backing and plays its cards right. Now, the last thing I'd like to say is the other way that India could, be of some use there and also make it a win-win game for all is from this long and very impassioned speech made by the Taliban spokesperson last night. It's obvious that they're aiming to form a loose confederation of tribes, if you like, and seek participation of all, those of loggerheads and others in a united front of Afghanistan of sorts. Now, I agree with Ambassador Sinha as to the, how long that kind of unity is likely to last, because traditionally they've not had stable governments. But if you like, the psychologies, the histories and the experiences of these various tribes, Uzbek, Tajik, Pashtun, Hazara, etc. The fabric, the diversity is very similar to that of India. And if not in terms of religious communities, at least in terms of languages and landscapes, etc. So in the matters of government formation also, I think India could play an advisory role and be of some use there.
Okay, let me actually, thanks Padma, let me actually take that to Lisa and Ambassador Sinha. The central question will remain whether there is leverage that can be exerted with the Taliban by India or by any other country that can get them to act independent of Pakistan. Now, Lisa, we have a situation where Kabul security is being controlled by the Haqqanis, by the Haqqani network, of which we know is controlled by Pakistan. You were, in the Trump administration when talks were first opened with the Taliban. Was it your assessment in those talks that the Taliban was willing to step aside of Pakistan at any level that is significant?
Well, I think that's an excellent question, and I can't say that, we saw that. I think that, Pakistan still has a lot of influence on the Taliban, particularly the Haqqani network. And the Haqqanis are always at the top table with the leadership. So while I said earlier that people like Mullah Barater, maybe, one-on-one conversation with him would show a different side to that, when they make decisions, they have the shura, they come together to make their major decisions, and that's made as a group. So unfortunately, I don't think that we should trust the Taliban. I don't think that we should, grant diplomatic recognition unless we see, very concrete steps to separate themselves from terrorism, because everything we know about the Haqqani network is that they are a terrorist organization. They have committed some of the worst, most horrendous attacks in Afghanistan over the last several years. And let's not forget that just a few weeks ago, the Taliban was targeting civil society leaders, journalists, human rights activists. They assassinated the head of state media just a few weeks ago. So we need to wade very carefully into this, and we need to see actions that demonstrate they're not going to act in the ways they have in the past, because the past record is terrible. And I think we need to keep that reality at the front of our minds.
Are you worried at this point that the Americans have begun to see the Taliban as a virtual ally? I mean, I don't want to use the word ally, as a partner of sorts?
Well, unfortunately, I think there are certain senior officials who do overestimate the kind of cooperation that we would get from. I don't think the Taliban will ever be a counterterrorism partner. I don't think we can count on them. Look, with the Afghan security forces, we were taking out al-Qaeda, we were cooperating. We don't have that luxury anymore. The Taliban will not be a partner on terrorism, and I don't think we should look at them as such. But unfortunately, I think you're right. I think there are senior officials within the administration that for some reason or another assume that we can work with the Taliban. They have some wishful thinking, or they're looking at this through rose-colored glasses. And I think that's a mistake. I think we need to be smarter and more discerning and look at actions on the ground, not just focus on the words that they're telling us.
Ambassador Sinha, having sat with the Taliban at the same table in 2018, we're now in 2021. To all this talk about, is the Taliban different? About how a section of the Taliban has got used to a different kind of life, having lived in Doha, in a major city for so many decades. Do you sense any change, or do you think we must heed what Lisa Curtis is saying, that these right noises amount to nothing unless we have proof that the umbilical cord between Taliban and the Pakistani deep state can be cut? And if it can't be cut, I ask again, what are we gaining? What are we gaining precisely by engaging with them?
That's true. A lot of this policy is predicated on the fact that people assume that Taliban is a unified monolith, and that whatever the top leader says would be implemented on the ground. Now, that presumption itself, while it was all right while they were fighting a common enemy or waging a jihad, may not hold true once they come close to power. And this was predicted, that there will be fracturing. You can already see the tussle between the southern Pashtuns, the Kandaris, and the Helmandis against the eastern Pashtuns. And Haqqanis, which you say have taken control. They have not been given a control, they have taken control of Kabul security, have preempted the leadership and brothers and whatever distribution of power they would have wanted to do. Similarly, there were reports that there were other leaders who were appointed acting ministers for defense and interior, because they and their troops entered those buildings and occupied and declared themselves to be the acting defense minister. So you see signs that it is fracturing. Now, given this situation, how much of weight can you give to the leadership or what the spokesman is saying publicly? Of course, they have learned to say the right things. And that's how they got a deal, a Doha deal, which then got endorsed by UN Security Council. And many have taken it on face value. We in the region have to really, and what I agree with her, that while we should engage with them, but we have to trust. And I think, wasn't it President Reagan who said, trust but verify? And that should be our motto. We should not be in a rush to give them legitimacy. And we have leverages, the aid, the assistance, the people-to-people connect in terms of the visas that we provide, the medical assistance, and the development partnership portfolio, which Taliban wants to happen. Happened? So there are a lot of things that they also want to be done correctly, but they also need to sort of show that they are going to implement what they are saying.
Yeah, but Brigadier Thapar, looking at this as a soldier, I would be thinking, you've got the line of control, problem Pakistan. You've got the line of actual control, problem China. You've got the Chinese hosting the Taliban before they took over Kabul. I know it seems to me that I'm sort of the most cynical about this engagement in this conversation. But I'm just wondering how the military has to, completely adapt. Just our military, I guess militaries across the world have to adapt to a completely new strategic way, thinking. This is going to be a brand new strategic thinking. Brigadier?
Yes, undoubtedly, because now as things are developing in this region, Pakistan, which had its attention divided, so to say, on its western and eastern border, now is more or less relieved from the western border. Probably in a year or so, it can focus its energies, its resources against the eastern border. And I'm sure our military leadership and political leadership is alive to this issue, and necessary steps will be taken. More than India, I look forward that this whole region is going to be a little unstable because China also has the Uyghur issue in the border areas facing Afghanistan. So similarly with Iran and Pakistan, the relationship is not going to be very smooth as history has told us. So this area will remain in a state of constant unrest, as I see, for the next couple of years.
And that is my concern, Happymon, that when you say engage the Taliban, we may be headed for a back to future moment. We all lived through those years when bombs and terror attacks would rip through Indian cities. the impact of this is not just going to be on Kashmir. A mere statement from the Taliban saying we will not allow our soil to be used for terror activities. I mean, even Pakistan says that. Even Pervez Musharraf said that. What does it all amount to? I understand that engaging the Taliban may be inevitable, but let's not fool ourselves that it's going to lead somewhere. Happymon?
Barkha, let me put it this way. Even in its earlier avatar from 96 to 2001, how many times did the Taliban attack India? I mean, of course, IC 814 was a major incident, and it remains fresh in our memory. But the reality is that it was not as if the Taliban or Afghans were running riot in Kashmir. But let me take a step back, Barkha. Here, I think what is encouraging here is that the Taliban today is speaking like a state, not as a militia, and to me that is very important. I think we cannot approach the whole issue of talking to the Taliban. What are we getting out of it? Is it the smart thing to do in a black and white manner? I would argue that you are looking at a certain amount of moderation within the Taliban, and one might say, and again, as Ambassador Sinha said,
why would they need to be moderate? I mean, we have to ask ourselves the next question. Even to Ambassador Sinha's point that money is a leverage, their accounts are frozen. They have the Chinese. They have a superpower like the Chinese who might be perfectly willing to bankroll them. So when you talk about their possible moderation, why would they need to be moderate, Happymon?
Because they want to hedge their bets. They do not want to be subservient to just one country, be it Pakistan. They've learned their lesson of having dealt with Pakistan exclusively from 1960 to 2001. And I don't think the Taliban today wants as a state to be exclusively subservient to Pakistan or the Chinese. They want to be recognized as a state. I mean, they have seen how the international system functions. They are a lot more exposed to the international realities, as it were. It is a different matter altogether whether at the end of the day the street fighters of the Taliban will dictate terms to the leadership. We do not know that. There is of course that challenge that we have to face. There is also the issue of the Pakistan-Taliban relations, and Dr. Curtis rightly pointed out that there is very little love lost between the leadership of the Taliban based in Doha and the Pakistanis themselves. As she pointed out, Mullah Baradar, who is an influential figure within the Taliban movement, spent almost 10 years in the Pakistani prison. So have many other Taliban leaders. So I think the Taliban will try and hedge their bet. And I think, as Abbas Sinha said, we shouldn't trust them, trust but verify. It is not as if we talk to the Pakistanis every now and then and sort of take completely what they say in good faith and leave it at that. No, we don't do that, right? So if we can have negotiations with the Pakistanis who have probably killed more Indians then why not have a conversation with the Taliban? So I think the whole Taliban-Pakistan connection definitely exists, but I think it's probably over-exaggerated today. I think it is not all that black and white as it was probably the case quickly, as it were.
Okay, I've got just a few minutes left. Let me bring in Padma. It's interesting that Happymon says if you can to Pakistan, why not to the Taliban? In many ways, it's the reverse question that's being asked. If you can talk to the Taliban, why not talk to Pakistan?
Yeah, I agree with him. I said that right in the beginning. If we're talking to even China and even Pakistan, with whom we've had border wars, and Pakistan is for us the source of all terrorism. We still maintain some form of communication open with Pakistan. Just very quickly, Barkha, I just wanted to go back to what Lisa said. She said, one shouldn't trust the Taliban. I completely agree with her. But we're seeing some rather surprising moves come in from NATO member states, specifically Germany, for instance. You know that the Foreign Minister Heiko Maas was on a tour of the neighboring countries of Afghanistan, and his government has just granted 500 million euros, of which to the neighboring countries for the, in order for them to deal with the refugees coming from Afghanistan, of which 100 million is going directly to the Taliban as so-called humanitarian aid. Now that's certainly not a sign that the Germans are sort of approaching this whole thing with caution or any form of wariness. There's a very obvious attempt to spend a lot of money to ensure that they get what they want, which was in this case the extension of the deadline to evacuate people who work for them. But the other thing I wanted to say is that the Al-Qaeda, for instance, and also this trust, the point that Lisa raised about trust, the Al-Qaeda, for instance, has just congratulated the Taliban. I mean, here we are, the Americans saying that, okay, we went in there to get smoke the Al-Qaeda out. We've done our jobs and we're getting out. But the Al-Qaeda is nowhere near smoked out, and they're jubilating the return of the Taliban and the fact that they're hearing the Quran, in Kabul again. So, and as far as Pakistan is concerned, Pakistan, I think one of the co-panelists mentioned the fact that Pakistan is militarily freer. I'm sorry, the gentleman from the army. Yes, certainly maybe militarily freer on its eastern border, for sure. But I don't think it's entirely tension-free because, as you see, the whole talk on the Durand line has reopened. So there is a certain amount of diplomatic tension. And as Happymon was saying, or I think somebody else was saying, it's no secret that Pakistan in itself is not top of the pops as far as the average common Afghan people are concerned.
Let me just jump in here to get last comments from Lisa and Ambassador Sinha. Lisa Curtis, to you. If you look at the multiple ironies that are stacking up, right? The US goes from being the nation that famously says we do not negotiate with terrorists to launching a war to get the Al-Qaeda out. The Al-Qaeda today is jubilant. The Taliban gets to be the good guys against now this new amorphous, no one quite knows what exactly the Islamic State Khorasan is. And America seems enfeebled. China seems on the ascent. Pakistan seems to be the vassal colony of China. And the Taliban, we are divided on whether it's the vassal army of Pakistan. What does this do to this region and indeed to global security?
Look, I think we all need to be very concerned about what has taken place this week with the Taliban taking over Afghanistan. I can't help but remember the 1999 hijacking of the Indian airplane, which landed, in Afghanistan. The Taliban facilitated that holding of, 200 some Indian passengers on the tarmac there. So I think we all need to be extremely skeptical. This is a group that has a terrible track record of being directly involved in terrorism. And so we need to be very careful. And, with regard to what we might see, like you said, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda are still closely linked. Whereas the Taliban may be opposed to ISIS-K, we should have no illusions that they maintain close relations with Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda could very well reemerge, rebuild itself, as well as so many other terrorist groups, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and so many others that the Taliban is still allied with. And I think we are likely to see foreign terrorist fighters from other countries converging on Afghanistan. They are still friendly to terrorists. And so we're in a very dangerous moment. We do need to have a communication line to protect our own citizens. But we should not have any illusions about who the Taliban is, who they've been allied with, what they have done in the past. And that's why I would just, a huge amount of caution in what to expect.
I think that's an important reality check. Ambassador Sinha, quickly before we close the program, what are the options before India as a state today? There's been some talk about appointing a special envoy. Happymon, are you trying to get a sentence in before I give Ambassador Sinha the last word? Okay, let's just get a brief sentence from Happymon, and then Ambassador Sinha, you can close this for us. Happymon?
I just want to sort of, Barkha, also point out the fact that there is a difference between the 1996 to 2001 period and the period that we are witnessing today for three very quick reasons. Number one, at that point of time, India was actively supporting a group called the Northern Alliance against the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. So it was not as if India was, having a great relationship or friendship with the Taliban at that point of time. Point number one. Number two, Taliban absolutely made no commitments during that period from 1996 to 2001 that, hey, we will not do anything antithetical to your interests. Number three, India did not have an ongoing dialogue or discussion through the back channel or any channel with the Taliban at that time. That is not the case now. Therefore, I think there are differences. I think these certain differences need to be kept in mind.
Okay, Ambassador Sinha, options before India.
I think the options are all bad options. If you say that you have to deal with Taliban, that is true, but you have to choose the best among the bad options. But I think that while we should engage with Taliban, our main thrust of our people-centric policy should continue and immediately. And I think there is a humanitarian crisis facing Afghanistan. So even if we can provide aid in terms of food, medicine, etc., shelter, to different parts of the country, because of course the distribution will not be in our control, but we can work with WFP. I think that will be a good gesture and we should do that. But before I close, I just wanted to say one thing on IC 814 for your, and of course on China, but that China is a new debate we should have.
Yeah.
Because China's ability, of course it has deep pockets, but its ability to step in the US and fill up that void, I think has been talked up too much.
Okay.
You see, just because if you just look at the numbers, it doesn't. China is not going to give $8 billion a year to Pakistan. If it did, then it should have given $20 billion in aid to Pakistan, and Pakistan wouldn't have to go to Saudi Arabia and UAE, etc. So that is not going to happen. I think people are just sort of bringing up this China thing. Second, in IC 814, there is a very interesting but a different point of view from the Taliban perspective, and this I say because I've spoken to at least 4 or 5 of them, ex-Taliban. They all say that India holds us responsible for IC 814 for somehow, and they overlook the fact that what we did was a humanitarian gesture in opening up the airport, allowing a plane running out of fuel to land, despite having no relationship. Then they also have accept that, you yourself say that we were not free. We did not have agency in our first regime, but you still hold us responsible. They say it was the Pakistanis who planned it, who sent Pakistani sort of hijackers to Nepal, and they did everything. But India seems to hold Afghan and the Taliban responsible. So with that, I'll close my comments.
Are you convinced of that argument?
To a very large extent, because Mullah Zaif has spoken, the deputy ambassador in Pakistan, Stanikzai, we had a long chat on this in Moscow. So I see the reason or the point that they're trying to make. They say, well, if we were free, obviously we would have given it back, all the guys, to you. But obviously we were under control of the ISI. And this is something that they acknowledge openly.
Well, I think that will be the test. How much is the Taliban willing to, able to step out of the shadows of the ISI, and also the Lisa Curtis reality check about the enmeshed network of connections with terror groups like the Al-Qaeda. But I do take the point that everybody has made that communication channels, which were probably covert, what's the harm in them being overt? I think that's where we are today. We probably don't know much more than that, because who would have said a fortnight ago that so quickly the world would change as we know it. Leaving it there, Dr. Lisa Curtis, Ambassador Sinha, Happymon Jacob, Padma Rao, and to Brigadier Thapar, thank you. And to our audience, see you tomorrow, same time. Thanks for watching. Goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalists.